Good morning, Vineyard Milwaukee. We're so glad to have you with us today. We're going to sing a couple songs together, but before that, let's pray. Holy Spirit, we welcome you to wherever we are at this time, to our homes and our hearts. We desire to worship you and to lift up your name. Please make yourself known to each of us wherever we are, and help us to worship you in spirit and truth. Amen.
And I believe you are the way, the truth, and the life. And I believe you are the way, the truth, and the life. I believe through every battle, every heartbreak, through every circumstance, I believe that you are my fortress, that you are my portion, that you are my hiding place. I believe you are the way, the truth, the light. I believe you are the way, the truth, the light. I believe through every blessing, through every promise, through every breath I take. I believe that you are provider, you are protector, you are the one I love. I believe you are the way, the truth, the light. I believe you are the way, the truth, the light. I believe you are. It's a new horizon, and I'm set on you. And to meet me here today, the mercies that I knew, all my fears and doubts, they can all come true, because they can't stay long when I'm here with you. It's a new horizon, and I'm set on you. And you meet me here today, the mercies that I knew, all my fears and doubts, they can all come true, because they can't stay long. And I believe you are the way, the truth, the light. I believe you are the way, the truth, the light. I believe you are. And it's a new horizon, and I'm set on you. And you meet me here today, the mercies that I knew, all my fears and doubts, they can all come true, because they can't stay long. And I'm here with you. It's a new horizon, and I'm set on you. And you meet me here today, mercies that I knew, all my fears and doubts, they can all come true, because they can't stay long. And I believe you are the way, the truth, and the light. And I believe you are the way, the truth, the
decirte que eres mi Dios, Dios poderoso, Dios del descanso. Mientras cantamos, aquí tú estás. You are the one who sees all our needs. You are the one who provides. You are the peace that our souls receive. En ti podemos descansar. God over our striving, God over our sleep, God over our struggle, our work and our rest, God over our future, God over our history, God over our family, our people, our land, God over our striving, God over our sleep, God over our struggle, our work and our rest, God over our future, God over our history, God over our family, our people, our land. You are the one who sees all our needs. You are the one who provides. You are the peace that our souls receive. En ti podemos descansar. You are the one who sees all our needs. You are the one who provides. You are the peace that our souls receive. En ti podemos descansar. We lift you up, you lift us up. When we lift you up, you lift us up. When we lift you up, you lift us up. En ti podemos descansar. When we lift you up, you lift us up. When we lift you up, you lift us up. When we lift you up, you lift us up. En ti podemos descansar. When we lift you up, you lift us up. When we lift you up, you lift us up. When we lift you up, you lift us up. En ti podemos descansar. You are the one who sees all our needs. You are the one who provides. You are the peace that our souls receive. En ti podemos descansar. You are the one who sees all our needs. You are the one who provides. You are the peace that our souls receive. En ti podemos descansar. You are the one who sees all our needs. You are the one who provides. You are the peace that our souls receive. En ti podemos descansar.
Good morning, Vineyard Milwaukee. Today we're working on going through the Sermon on the Mount. We've been doing this series called The Upside Down Kingdom, and we've been looking at one of Jesus' most famous teachings called the Sermon on the Mount. And we've been looking at it through Matthew chapter 7. And today we're getting to the point where Jesus is actually kind of almost coming to the conclusion of his talk. And in this portion today that we're going to look at, is he starts to speak to some of those sort of tender spaces, those deep places within us, the places where our actions and our behaviors sort of come from. So let's go ahead and look into this verse. It's Matthew chapter 7, verse 1 through 6. He says this, "Do not judge, or you too will be judged. For in the same way you judge others, you will be judged. And with the measure you use, it will be measured to you. Why do you look at the speck of the sawdust in your brother's eye and pay no attention to the plank in your own eye? How can you say to your brother, 'Let me take the speck out of your eye,' when all the time there is a plank in your own eye? You hypocrite, first take the plank out of your own eye, and then you will see clearly to remove the speck from your brother's eye. Do not give dogs what is sacred. Do not throw your pearls to pigs. If you do, they may trample them under their feet and turn and tear you to pieces." So that's the verse we're going to look at today. It's a little strange. It's a little peculiar. But Jesus is actually addressing this thing called judgment. Now, remember, he's addressing his people on the Sermon on the Mount. These are people that are following him, that are listening to his teachings, the people of God. So let's just start off right away. Verse 1, "Do not judge, or you too will be judged." Pretty simple. It doesn't take a scholar to understand what Jesus is getting at. However, if we are going to fully understand what he's after and really understand, we have to define this term judge. So the definition in Greek of this word is like a really expansive definition. But if we were just to sort of strip it down in this text, it means to make a distinction. So it's a statement or something either being wrong or good. It's making sort of this judgment, this statement. This is wrong, this is good. This is bad, this is good, this is wrong, this is right. Jesus' statement seems pretty simple, but there's real actual power behind it. This short sentence is actually one of the most vital commandments in this whole Sermon on the Mount. It's through this command that the people are shaped. And where they're shaped, they're either shaped by reconciliation or they're shaped by condemnation. This first verse is like the thesis statement to this entire section. And it speaks to us about the workings of life in the upside down kingdom with our family, with our coworkers, our neighbors. In fact, this idea of judgment is not missing anyone. It's going to touch all of us in our lives at some point. Okay, so do not judge, or you too will be judged. Verse 1, easy, right? You got it. Verse 2, "For in the same way you judge others, you will be judged. And with the measure you use, it will be measured to you." Now, this verse is saying that we have expected the same standards of judgment applied to both the judger and the one being judged. It's as simple as that, meaning if judgment or the judgment we bring to someone is harsh, or if it is graceless, then we should expect the same kind of judgment to befall on us. This is a strong verse for the idea of sympathy, and a strong verse to sort of check yourself before you open your mouth. This is a strong verse at the same time, but Jesus seems to be pulling back the veil of our often wrapped belief system on judgment. This idea that we believe that those of us who are judging have a right and freedom to do so, and that we will be exonerated from the judgment ourselves. I know none of you think like that. And it's pulling back this veil, this belief system, that if we show signs of disapproval for those who have lost their way, they're actually going to be impacted by it, that they will be corrected by our judgment. And here Jesus reminds us that that mindset leads us to a place that actually the judgment falls on ourselves. He breaks this down in verse 3 and 4, and when he says this, he says, "Why do you look at the speck of sawdust in your brother's eye and pay no attention to the plank in your own eye? How can you say to your brother, 'Let me take the speck out of your eye,' when all the time there is a plank in your own eye?" Now here, Jesus is giving us an actual picture of what he's talking about in this verse above. This is ridiculous. This is a ridiculous one. A plank in an eye. It makes no sense. Jesus does have kind of a sense of humor. It's almost comical to think about somebody having a plank in their eye. It's kind of supposed to be. The plank is sticking out of somebody's eye. It's supposed to represent something like your own sin. When it's something so blatant and obvious and humiliating, it's like this ridiculous picture of me with a plank in my eye. And that's the point Jesus is making. Why have a propensity to undervalue our own faults and failures while overvaluing the faults and failures of other people? And like knocking down cameras. You get the idea. Of course, in this text, Jesus isn't saying that we shouldn't have high standards of behaviors of ourselves and for other people. What he's talking about, though, is this temptation to look on each other or to judge one another as failures. So he makes it clear that when we assume the posture of God on other people's lives, there will be this revealing of the way that we too have sinned. Jesus is telling us how to avoid being called a hypocrite, which if you're a disciple of Jesus, this is the narrative that we hear sometimes about ourselves all too often, right? Who we really are. This is the narrative that you're actually going to hear who you are. And here he says, in order to avoid being hypocritical and this issue of judgment, and in that losing all credibility with one that you've now judged or the one you're correcting, that we should clean up our act before we look to other people and their sin. And then, and only then, after we've examined ourselves and dealt with our own sin, he says, will we be able to see clear enough to not take the posture of God, but have a posture in mercy to actually seek to help the other person who has the speck in their eye. And this is Jesus. He's so masterful in how he's saying it. He's not even obsessed with issues like, hey, make sure you clean up your act before you call someone else out. He's saying, like, you actually can't even see clearly until you deal with what's in your life. Dietrich Bonhoeffer, he puts it this way. He says, when I judge, I am blind to my own evil and to the grace granted the other person. See, it's almost like having dirty glasses. For those people who have glasses, you just can't. I've gone to lunch with a friend of mine, and I often don't clean my glasses, and it drove him crazy because he saw all the dirt in my glasses, and I just looked right through it and didn't even see it. We got to clean up our glasses to see properly. Oftentimes, when we approach other people, we're doing it through dirty glasses. We're not truly seeing them. We're not even seeing their true representation of even their flaws because we can't see really, truly past ours. If we don't clean up those glasses to see things that aren't actually there and that we're actually doing harm to others, and we're stepping into places we shouldn't even be approaching or stepping into. And that's what Jesus is getting at here with this ridiculous analogy, by the way. Now we move on to verse 6. And in verse 6, he starts talking about pigs and dogs. He says, do not give dogs what is sacred. Do not throw your pearls to pigs. If you do, they may trample them under their feet and turn and tear you to pieces. Okay, so now we're talking about dogs, pigs, sacred stuff, pearls. Some scholars would say that Jesus has given an example of what happens when we play God with others. And in that, push the things of God onto other people. whether they are ready for them or not. Others would say that this text is saying that as disciples of Jesus, we're to treasure and to guard the message of the kingdom as something sacred, beautiful, something to be treasured, and something to be valued. And I kind of think they're both right in this text. These two examples are the way that Jesus made distinctions between those in the community of Jesus and those on the outside of the community. And he isn't suggesting that there are certain classes of people and that some of you are dogs and some of you are pigs. He's not saying that. He's saying that we shouldn't give good things and do good deeds to those outside of the community, the faith community that we are in, even to those who might reject or misuse them. He's not saying that at all. I think more accurately, he's highlighting a problem that we have. He's saying that when we reference holy things like the meaning or the message of the kingdom for people who are outside of the community of Jesus, it's not always helpful. Now, this isn't an argument against evangelism. You need to speak and you need to share the gospel with those who need it. But this is a sort of a warning for those of us who are disciples of Jesus. This picture that Jesus is speaking to is more about our efforts to correct and control things by giving good things to people. It's speaking to our desires to help people along their journey to Jesus. And in that, to kind of harass them or to move them with holy talk or with condemnation to do the things that we want them to do that are right. And there's this sort of warning for us. Like N.T. Wright says this, he says, what matters here is our approach to people, and what matters in our approach then is people. It's not just what we do, but how we do it. A superior attitude or like condemnation will never help us out. He's saying that if we're to be mindful of when and how we speak to people about the message of the upside down kingdom, and above all, we have to be aware of the temptation to be superior, even if it's small or subtle. You know, a while back, I helped put together this basketball team at a community center. And it was a really rough bunch of kids. We sort of waited until the high school basketball tryouts were over. And we basically took what some people would call just a band of misfits that no coach wanted to work with. Many of our kids were drug dealers. We had a kid who was homeless that we'd have to pick him up at a shelter for practice. This is just a really rough bunch of kids. And this community center was run by a church. And one of the deals was I didn't coach the team, but they had to spend 1 hour a week with me, and we'd kind of talk and have conversation about things. And Jesus would often come up. And I remember word kind of spread that these guys had chosen a life of Jesus, and they were working on that. And I remember being stopped by one of our volunteers in the lobby of the community center, and he stopped me and he goes, I thought that those boys are now Christian. And I thought it was just kind of odd. And I was like, well, what boys are you talking about? You know, that basketball team. And I said, well, you know, many of them are like trying to figure out what it means to follow Jesus and to be an apprentice of Jesus. And I remember this gentleman saying, no, they haven't. They don't know him yet, because I caught them all watching porn in the lobby on their phone. And I thought to myself, I didn't know what to do with the information. I'm like, they literally, like, it was like the day before they had just figured out who Jesus was, and they didn't know that maybe that porn was not a good thing for their heart and soul and mind at the time. And here, this person was immediately judging them and seeing all their flaws, but not seeing how God was actually changing their hearts slowly, teaching them to love, teaching them to show mercy and grace for each other and for those that are around them. And the person didn't even make an impact other than he confronted them in a really, really angry, inappropriate way. And it did damage. It did damage. And what we're trying to say here is that there's this threat of what we're talking about. That there's a line of judgment and being judgmental. And it's looking at someone who's like outside of the community of faith and judging them for what they do not know or do not have. And this is a simple warning for us to not do that. Now, for any of us who are followers of Jesus, who would consider ourselves apprentices of Jesus, there's a tension in this text, and it's unavoidable. It seems, in other places in Scripture, if you're familiar at all with the Bible, you know that throughout the Scriptures, there's commands that we encourage us, the people of God, to prophetically evaluate sin in people's lives in our faith community. And as a disciple of Jesus, there is a call or a set of partnering that sort of gives us authority to speak into people's lives that are around us. And there's this distinction between judgment and correction. Now, in the history of Christianity, these two terms have become sort of kind of blurred and in Christianity. As many of us have experienced it historically, that the culture breeds suspicion and often leads towards judgment. And in that, we have this tendency to make some things that are that change the central impact of our lives, that in fact are not central. And it is these experiences that have sort of led us to places of judgment. So judgment is when we call out perceived evil or wrongdoing on another person without loving them. It's when we draw attention to someone else's wrongs just to draw attention to it. And then we make a declaration about the person's identity, not just their actions. Judgment is always rooted in selfish and self-righteous motives, and it always produces shame. It leaves no room for grace. It's rare that someone has ever changed by judgment of another person. I don't know if you've ever experienced that. I've never heard anyone say, I am a better person because I have now been judged. Now, I don't know if you're living through this pandemic, how you're doing it, and you're sitting around maybe, I don't know. I'm sure you haven't experienced anybody judging anybody during this pandemic, like, their stance on maybe school openings or vaccines or masks or churches, whether they're opening or closing, or whether they're kneeling or protesting. Those are really loud judgment things that we're hearing these days. Maybe you're hearing things like, she's totally getting fat during quarantine. He is so big now. He gained the COVID-20 easy. Or, I'm not so sure their marriage is going to make it out of this. Their kids, they're in real trouble. What terrible parents they are. I used to judge parents all the time, and then I became one. So when you're in that, do you ever stop and assess? Am I actually doing it? Am I actually judging? How do these comments intersect with my life, or the implications of it, or the implications on the culture, or the implications for my friends? Our culture uses day in and day out, both inside and outside the church, this thing called judgment. It's like this license that many of us have to not have to be in a relationship with that specific person, or what that other, or let me say that again. It's the license that many of us use to not have to be in a relationship with a specific person or with another person, that we use this judgment so I don't have to be in a relationship with them. Some of us use it as a defense. Many of us use it to not associate with people who are different than us. It's a currency in our culture that we exchange with one another, and we do it often through sarcasm, or we do it through quick remarks. But I believe it's become one of the greatest weapons that the enemy has used against us. And what's scary is it can often be subtle and even silent. And that's why this is such a dangerous thing. It's why it's it's such an important thing for Jesus to speak to. So when Jesus is saying don't judge, he's like speaking in a real profound way to us, the people of God, knowing it's going to impact more than just the surface layer of like do it or don't do it of this. He's literally warning that that covers both of the one being judged and the one judging. He's showing us how we've trained ourselves to hold people responsible without attacking their worth as human beings or making them feel rejected. And that's like master's level approach. And that's classic Jesus, right? This is why it's so important. Now, if you're a parent, you know correction is needed, right? If you've got kids, you know they need to be corrected. And because you've been one yourself if you don't have kids. And if you're a disciple of Jesus, it should be something that actually we receive openly and humbly correction. It's something that we will need if we actually want to move forward in our apprenticeship with Jesus. It should be sort of a regular part of our life as a disciple, letting the shortcomings surface in our lives and come before other people is normal for us. If we're actually going to be shaped into Jesus' likeness, we need to receive correction. Now, to be clear, the distinction between correction and judgment is when we correct someone, when we draw out wrong of another person, and we do it in a loving way, we do it in a way that seeks the good of the individual. We do it in a way where it's rooted in humility. If you've ever had to correct someone, you know it's one of the hardest things that you'll ever have to do. It's a hard thing because you're humbled by the reality of your own sin, your own weakness, your own sort of mess. And it's actually always working for the purpose of that person to get back into the path of discipleship with Jesus. And if it's not, it's judgment. If you're speaking to someone and correcting them and it seems as though it's has led them nowhere, it's going the wrong direction. It should always be bringing people back to the place of Jesus, into the presence of God in a deeper way. If that's the case, then it's not judgment. It's correction. And there's this distinction with judgment. We're assessing something that we see, and we're just seeing the fault for what it is, and we're naming it for what it is. In correction, we actually see the person behind the fault. That's what we're looking for. We're seeing the person, and when we look for the coming good, and we believe for the coming good for them, and that's the giant distinction there. And Jesus is saying, as disciples of Jesus, you will be people of correction. And for those of us who are wanting to grow and be mature disciples of Jesus, I think this is what we should be pressing into. Now, if we're going to do that, we need to know where judgment begins and ends. Because in order to not hold that shame of judgment that it brings, we need to know where it begins and ends. So some of us have had judgment from our parents, from our friends, or people who have loved us. And in order to not hold that shame that sometimes comes with that lumps into judgment, we'll have to understand what's actually taking place both in the judger and the one being judged. For some of us, we are judging others so critically, we don't even see, can't even understand the damage we're doing to ourselves. Because I'm willing to bet, and there are studies that can actually back me up on this, that you are judging yourself harsher than you're judging others. You're doing more damage to yourself by judging others. You only see the sum of your failures. We're disciplining ourselves to judge ourselves the same way. If we're seeing someone as an object or the sum of their failures, then we too will be we too will be interpreting that as to some of our failures. We need to get the speck out of our own eye. You need to deal with the sin, the pain, the insecurities, the loneliness, and the desires for your change. You need to deal with all that stuff, all that mess. One helpful way to actually deal with some of the stuff that we're talking about today is through Faithwalking. I know a number of our folks in our church have gone through a Faithwalking 101 retreat, and there is one coming up September 4th through the 5th, and it is going to be on Zoom, and we'll make more information available on this post after the sermon. It's a great opportunity to actually take an inventory of those places that you need to see change. An opportunity to get the speck or plank out of your eye and deal with your pain, sin, and shame. And that's the first step in moving away from being a judgmental person. Do the work through correction for cleaning up your dirty glasses, to take the plank or the speck out. And then next, it's like take captive your thoughts. Paul says, take captive your thoughts and make them obedient to Jesus. And Jesus is saying, see people as I see them. Engage them as I would. Allow me to search you and know you. Allow me to be your peace, to be your security. Allow me to be your healer. Allow me to do those things. This is life in the upside down kingdom. Go be the church.